Let's talk about the Memphis Grizzlies for this upcoming season. A season of change, a full season for new coach Tuomas Iisalo. Lots of stuff to get into. Michael Bolton.
Thanks, Josh. It's Michael Bolton here, and it's time for another episode of the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast. Let's get to it.
Let's get to it. Indeed.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NBA fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast, brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd, and you will no longer be able to find this podcast on Steam. I'm also the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com, and today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. Thank you also for making Locked On Fantasy Basketball your first listen every day. We are free. We're available on all platforms, so hit the thumb and double bang and leave your comments down below. We are here, we are ready, and we're going to talk Memphis Grizzlies. To talk about the Memphis Grizzlies, I'm joined by one of the hosts of the Locked On Grizzlies podcast. Joe Mullinax is here with me again to talk about this Grizzlies team. Normally when we're talking Grizzlies, Joe, we're in here and we're talking about the big three. We're talking about we're talking about Jaren Jackson, we're talking about Desmond Bane, but we're not anymore. We're not talking about Taylor Jenkins either because he's not there. So it is a new look sort of situation here for the Memphis Grizzlies heading into this season. And one of the things that happened, again, very weird to see this happen to multiple teams at the end of last season, with a coach who'd been well tenured and well respected and putting up good results, was fired just before the end of the regular season. So we got Tuomas Iisalo come in to be the Memphis Grizzlies head coach. He's confirmed as the head coach for this season. And unlike what we often see with new head coaches coming in and taking over in the interim, often they come in and it's business as usual. Not much changes from the previous coach. They've already been on that staff. It's the same thing, and then we see stuff change maybe in the offseason. But that didn't happen in Memphis because we saw a dramatic change in the way that Iisalo used Zach Edey, the starting center, because Jenkins would play him and he'd play 21 minutes or 22 minutes, and they'd play against a terrible team and he'd play 29 minutes, he'd look great, then he'd play 18 minutes the next game. Things changed dramatically, I thought, from an outsider perspective when the coaching change happened in terms of how Edey was used. Do you agree with that? And how do you quantify that?
Absolutely. A lot of folks point at Joe Morant being one of the main reasons that the coaching change happened. I disagree. I think the main reason that the coaching change happened was Zach Edey. Zach Edey is a guy that clearly was a part of the front office's plans. They made the moves they did. They made the selection there at 9 overall when players like Khalil Ware were on the board still. Memphis makes the move to go with Edey, and it was pretty clear to me that the front office and the coaching staff, or at least the head coach and Taylor Jenkins for the first time, they weren't simpatico, right? Now they are, right? They're back on the same page. They're back on the same kind of swing. Zach Edey is clearly a major piece of this. That doesn't mean that Edey is better than Joe Morant. It means that Zach Kleiman, the Grizzlies GM, clearly wants Zach Edey to be a major component of what this team is doing, and that was not the case under Taylor Jenkins. Joe Morant is going to be a star no matter who is his coach. But Tuomas Iisalo in this spot clearly relies on a lot of pick and roll. Ja is one of the better pick and roll guards in the NBA. Who better to initiate those types of sets than a 7'4", 290-pound, bigger Steven Adams, right? Now, obviously, he's not Steven Adams yet. Not trying to disparage the big Kiwi. He's a pretty impressive player, to say the least. We had him in Memphis for a few years. But that's kind of the ceiling for Zach Edey, with a better offensive game than Steven Adams, to be honest with you. The two-time Naismith Player of the Year has a capacity to score the basketball that has not translated to the NBA yet. And maybe it never does. Like, that's possible. He struggled catching passes at times. He looked kind of lost on that end. But if you're looking for somebody that's going to be a dominant big, that can set screens really well, can be an elite rebounder, he's going to be bigger than just about everybody that he plays against on the court. He's going to have a chance to really kind of maximize himself in these Tuomas Iisalo schemes because there's so much priority on that initial pick and roll set.
First of all, thank you for the pronunciation correction on the coach. I was calling him Iisalo. It's Iisalo. So thank you for that.
It's okay.
It's good
I've
to know.
mispronounced it a ton of times.
It's done. So I try to get these things right, and I hadn't noticed that difference from when he was initially hired. Tuomas Iisalo, the coach, it was a big change. And we saw the minutes, like you mentioned, like they went through the roof. Like he only averaged under 22 minutes a game for the season, Edey, but over the final month of the season, he was up to 23. He played 28 a game over the final 2 weeks of the season. Yeah, not to say that numbers were through the roof, like he only scored 9 points, but he grabbed 14 rebounds a game. He was just out there, and when you're out there, more things happen, and it is going to be interesting to see again what sort of schemes they work in. There, a lot of the concerns that I had for Edey heading into the draft and the draft process, I think a lot of them played out. Some concerns with foot speed and defensive stuff, and was he going to be able to shoot threes, and would he be able to eat the way he did in college on that gigantic usage? And the answer is no. Like, he's not going to get that sort of role. So his role and positioning is changing, but I think we're going to see a lot more now. The next part of this is, so when's he going to play? Because he's injured and he's had some surgery. So what's the outlook here on when we're actually going to see Zach Edey play?
You mentioned that I'm one of the hosts of Locked On Grizzlies. My great co-host, Michael Cole, is the Grizzlies beat writer for the Commercial Appeal, the local paper there in Memphis. The initial reporting is roughly 10 to 15 games out. So that would put him back at what? Mid-November, late November, something along those lines, Thanksgiving-ish in the United States. I think that's realistic for him. We have to remember that the Grizzlies are one of those teams that are usually pretty slow rolling with injuries. They're not going to rush any of these guys back, especially in this retooled reality, as you mentioned a little while ago. I wouldn't say the Grizzlies have decidedly gotten worse, but I also would not say that they got better, and a lot of teams in the Western Conference got better. Right? Yeah. So they're going to be – go ahead.
I was going to say, yeah, you're right. Like, I don't know that they got better necessarily, and that's something we're going to cover at the end of the show, is the direction of this thing. But I had to laugh because you mentioned about them slow rolling injuries. They're also you can't say this as much, Joe, and DeMichael definitely can't say this. They're probably the biggest liar I've ever seen in terms of injury reporting, with just fake
slow
grades.
Rolling is how we phrase it in Memphis.
But then they do the opposite, and there's like he's got a grade 3 ankle sprain, that'll be out for 3 months, and then a week later, like, he's back practicing, and then 3 weeks later, the guy's like, that's not a grade 3. I guess it wasn't. Well, who knows? So I find it really tough to believe anything they say, because not only do they sometimes underestimate, Jaren Jackson, who'll be back at the start of the season, and then it's January 1st and he's not there, but sometimes they overestimate and go, it's 10 weeks out, and then 6 weeks later he's back in there. So I just never know. I just never know what they're going to do, and it is a frustrating thing. So I actually had the projection on Edey about the same. I've got him back, I think, about the 10th of November as my initial projection, which is around that's 11 games missed, and then he'll be a bit of a ramp up into that scenario. I guess as we move through the center position, Brandon Clarke also missed the end of last season with a PCL issue. Would he be the guy that you think would start, or would they go with an Aldama, Jaren Jackson, who, by the way, also had a surgery and may not be ready for the start of the season? So, like, what the hell is happening with the big man spot? Let's assume that Jaren and Brandon Clarke maybe aren't playing and Zach is out. Like, what do they do?
I think that they plan on Brandon Clarke being ready.
Okay.
That was one. It was a sprained PCL, but it wasn't the same as Steven Adams. If you follow the NBA, you might remember that was kind of the beginning of the end of the Grizzlies-Adams relationship, was how to get that injury treated. Wasn't the same with Brandon Clarke. I think they expect him there. My guess would be Clarke getting the start, because they love the idea of Jaren Jackson Jr. at the 4. The hypothetical Jaren as a 5 is probably best put in hypotheticals moving forward. I think he's best as a 4. And Clarke, even though he's undersized, is a true 5. I think they also like Santi Aldama as a scoring big off the bench, like a sixth man kind of pop of points. So that's probably how they'll go, if I had to guess. I think they also are hoping that Jaren will be ready for opening night. But again, slow rolling of these injuries, it's certainly possible we're talking about a Santi Aldama, or on Locked On Grizzlies, DeMichael and I have talked a little bit about the 6'9", 225-pound Gigi Jackson as a potential stretch 4, scoring 4, almost like a Carmelo Anthony type. Not as good, obviously, but just in terms of that being a combo forward spot where Gigi could provide some potential scoring there. I think they have options, but I think if things go the way that they currently look to be going, it'll be Jaren Jackson Jr. and Brandon Clarke on opening night.
it's going to be something to watch because, again, there's a lot of names there, but 3 of the 4 guys we're talking about are currently injured, and we'll see how that all plays out. I want to talk about some of the other changes with the guard spot on this team in a sec. Today's episode, though, is brought to you by Monarch Money. Most people can't name all their financial accounts or even what they're worth. It might be 401ks, might be properties or investments, and when you don't have that full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. Maybe you want to give away a first-round pick to salary dump Marcus Smart. I don't know, but maybe if you had that tracked in Monarch Money, you'd be able to see that maybe that's not the best idea. That's why there is Monarch Money, an all-in-one personal finance tool that helps bring your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or your phone. Monarch does the heavy lifting for you, so you can link all of your accounts in minutes, see clear data visuals, get smart categorizations of your future first-round picks, your spending, and you'll finally feel in control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet. So don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. That is 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with the code LOCKEDONNBA. All right, so we are going to talk more about Desmond Bane and the trade a little bit later on, but what we want to talk about here is that there is a situation now where there's a level of uncertainty, I guess, with the potential starting group. We've talked about the forwards. There's Ja Morant's going to be in there. They got Kentavious Caldwell-Pope back, who had a down season, but is still pretty solid. Jalen Wells was pretty good as a rookie, wasn't playing necessarily full starters minutes. But then you had the guy that we saw play some starters minutes down the stretch last season in Scottie Pippen, who it was a really rollercoaster season for Pippen in terms of he filled in for Morant, looked great. And then he would move back to the third string point guard role and he'd sit some games out. Then he'd come back and play 20 minutes behind Ja. Then he'd play 26 minutes. Then he'd play next to Ja. Then he'd start. Then he'd play 29 minutes. Then he'd go back. Is there any, and they acquired Ty Jerome as well, who is not the same player as Scottie Pippen, but their positional value sort of overlaps. Do you think that, again, let's assume that it's Jaren, Santi, Jaren, Brandon, Jaren, Zach, whatever, as the 4 and the 5, and we've got Morant at the 1. So it leaves KCP, it leaves Wells, it leaves wildcard flyers of Vince Williams and GG Jackson, but then there's also Pippen and Jerome in that mix. Is there a chance that they go back to the Pippen-Morant pairing, or if they don't, how does that sort of balance between those two figure out in the second unit?
I think that one of the reasons Desmond Bane is no longer a member of the Memphis Grizzlies is because Jalen Wells was as good as he was as a rookie. You could easily argue he was the best value pick of anybody in the NBA draft in 2024. This is a second-round guy that was an all-NBA player on terms of all-rookie team. I think that you're looking at a reality where it's probably Wells is the 2. And if Wells is the 2 in the starting lineup, then that probably means that Kentavious Caldwell-Pope is the 3. So if you're in that space, that places a greater importance on Ja Morant, which I'm sure we'll talk about later. But if you're going with Jalen Wells as that defensive guard, and you have KCP, who did have a down season, but let's be honest, the Orlando Magic didn't really have anybody that could create offense off the dribble the way that certainly Nikola Jokic, just creating offense in general. And then Ja Morant off the dribble in particular. The Magic didn't have a player of either of their caliber in that specific space. So KCP is going to have more open looks in Memphis than he did in Orlando. So I think we'll have a bit of a bounce back here. I'm not expecting him to look the way he did again playing with Jokic, but I do think he'll look better than he did with the Magic. If it's Wells and KCP, then that means Pippen and Jerome are your backups. And the thing that I like about that, Josh, is I believe both of those guys can play with Ja Morant. Now, who plays next to Ja the most in terms of mirroring skill sets best is probably Scottie Pippen Jr. Because Scottie is a better defensive player than Ja. He can take that bigger defensive assignment, and that allows for somebody like Morant to not have to exert as much energy on that end of the floor. I think Morant and Jerome can play together, but it certainly forces you to have 3 defensive stoppers behind those 2. Because if Ja Morant's not a defensive weapon, Ty Jerome surely is not a defensive weapon. And I love the offensive fit. I think Ty Jerome is really going to make a lot of sense within what Iisalo wants to do offensively. But you have to have some sort of balance there, especially if you're going to start Wells and KCP, which, again, in terms of creating offense off the dribble, neither of those guys are really known for that. So I think you're going to see a lot of intermingling with the rotation. I would doubt that you'll see true 5 reserves together at any point. I think if you have Ja next to Scottie, it allows for you to have the greatest amount of versatility in terms of who the other 3 guys are. I think that if you have Ja next to Ty Jerome, it unlocks the offense in a more unique way. But it limits, you have to have Jaren out there. You have to have Wells or KCP out there. You have to have a big like Brandon Clarke as your 4 and Jaren as your 5, perhaps, in terms of switchability. And that inhibits what Jaren can do. You're not unlocking your second highest paid player the same way anymore. So I do believe that Jerome is going to provide real value to this Grizzlies offense. But if they're going to try to keep balance, I think Pippen Jr. balances that backcourt duo more than Jerome does. I could see Ty kind of taking on that backup point guard role and Jerome being more of that combo guard that sees a majority of his time with Ja.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. Like, Pippen is one of those players that like flashed some really good stuff, even as a rookie or a summer league guy in G League player in his first season. And in year 2, there was a lot of underlying, really strong analytic numbers. And then even last season, like he just looked the part. Like his shooting improved, he passed well, he defended incredibly well. He played 21 minutes a game only last season, and I think that there's plenty of scope for that to improve. Whereas you're right, Jerome and Morant together is pretty flammable from a defensive perspective as a backcourt, and yeah, Jerome is a better shooter, but Jerome's also 28, and he's done this once in his career. Like, he had a bunch of other seasons where he was, let's be fair, like useless most of them, and he had a really good season, and I'm not saying it's a bad signing. I think it's a really good signing. It gives extra depth, but I would be trying to put Pippen into those spots more often because I do think the fit is interesting. But the point you brought up is you lose Desmond Bane, who had self-creation, spot-up ability, and if KCP can't create a thing, and Jalen Wells hasn't shown that ability, and Pippen's not great at it, he's okay. Jerome probably is the best self-creator out of that group, so it is going to require mix and matching. And if we're talking about 2 main rotational or 2 starting spots and 4 guys in the mix, not even including Vince Williams, GG Jackson, you're going to have situations where it's 26 or 21 and the numbers change based on who's in or who's out. I guess the main question is, which is a pretty easy one now to talk about, because this is going to happen. Like, when Ja Morant misses games, not if, when Ja Morant misses games, missed the 5 games in a row legend, who do you think that they would want running that show? Because again, we talk about self-creation, and that's not really Pippen's game as much, but would Pippen be the guy? Do you think it's just going to be, okay, now we're leaning into more Jerome?
I think it's going to be Ty Jerome. But I do think, and maybe this is more of a topic for the last part of the show, the Desmond Bane trade is undoubtedly a call to the one true, because Jaren's contract is not a true max contract. Ja Morant is the one true max player on the Memphis Grizzlies roster in terms of a contract, and they're going all in with the guy, right, for better or worse. And clearly Nike still believes in him after all the hype of the Ja 3 and all its tours overseas. The Grizzlies still believe in him too. And this is a guy who they are putting their eggs in that basket. He has to be that creator. But to your point, I think he's played more than 65 games once in his career. Obviously, one of those was a COVID-related season, but he's not the most reliable in terms of presence on the court. So Ty Jerome being that lead guard makes sense to me, especially if your starting lineup is Jalen Wells, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, and then you got Jaren Jackson Jr. and Zach Edey eventually once he's healthy. Because, again, Jerome is your best self-creator of offense. Jerome is that guy who has that shooting stroke, brings a different level to the offense that isn't there anymore now that Desmond Bane is gone. I think it's Jerome in that starting slot, but I think that, again, you have Scottie Pippen Jr., who's going to be that true combo sixth man de facto guard. I think Santi Aldama is that guy in terms of being a combo forward, truly a big, a 4 or 5. They've got a couple of guys that are going to eat a lot of minutes in those spots. And the more I think about what makes the most sense for this roster, Ty Jerome is probably the 8th man, not the 6th, in terms of his fit. And that's a good spot for him. Like, to your point, if you're looking at Ty Jerome as a starter on a team trying to contend for an NBA Finals, ask the Cleveland Cavaliers how that works, right? It doesn't work well for you.
Yep.
If you're looking at Ty Jerome as a dark horse 6th man of the year who makes more sense in that 7th or 8th guy, I'd say that's a good use of a roster spot. That's good use of $8 million or so that the Grizzlies are paying on his contract. It's all about what role you're asking Jerome to fill. And I think that spot minutes or spot starts, hopefully, is going to be the way that Ty Jerome locks in that case. But make no mistake, the moves that have been made this offseason are a statement that Jaren Jackson Jr. and Ja Morant are our guys. And if Ja isn't able to be on the court consistently, none of this matters in terms of their success.
That's true. Like, if he's not there, it just won't matter. And interesting you say that you got Jerome is more of an 8th man. Like, I have my projections and I sort of have the guys ranked in terms of production and minutes, and I've got him 8th on this team with Morant, Jackson, Wells, Edey, KCP, Aldama, Pippen, and then we get to Ty Jerome, who sits in that comfortable spot, and then you get down to like what happens with Vince and Clarke and Gigi. Then there's a bunch of like, I've got no idea what these other guys are going to do after that. It is a sort of a strange-ish roster towards that back end. We're going to talk about a little bit more of the direction of the Grizzlies when we come back, because again, so much of this team, I guess some of it, Joe, was precipitated during the season. I was incredibly critical of what this team did during the season with the trade deadline. They were sitting up the top, 2nd seed, and they gave away players and assets for a salary-based purpose to save an owner money to see what they might do in terms of re-signing guys in the offseason, which I think honestly, that's a disservice to the fans. You can say, well, that helps us retain Aldama. You shouldn't care. If you're right at the top of the standings, like I know Marcus Smart hadn't played that much, but also they traded those guys away, and then they got to the stage and then they had other guys injured, and you just didn't have replacements because you had depth and you got rid of it to save money for the owner, which I don't like. And then this next Desmond Bane trade, again, they get assets, they get draft picks. There's a money-saving part of it in terms of those decisions. So the questions I think have to be asked. Now, you mentioned it is going in on Morant and Jackson as the 2 main guys, and that is true. But the return you get from Bane seems to be money and draft pick future focused return. So in terms of in that direction, I guess you've sort of answered a lot of this already in terms of them doubling down or really solidifying the focus on Morant. But how do you see the team, like we mentioned, they didn't necessarily get better, but like they gave away a good player for future focused and money saving decisions. So how do they then double down on Morant as that guy if they're giving him less to work with when already he's been incredibly unreliable?
I think that what we have to begin with is understanding that the Desmond Bane contract extension was signed before the new CBA went into effect, right? Even before it was negotiated. So the Grizzlies were comfortable at the time before the new CBA of having these 3 dudes that were going to make near max or max in the case of Ja Morant money. New CBA goes into effect. The big bad wolf that is the second apron goes into effect, and the Grizzlies are terrified of the luxury tax, much less the second apron. So I do think that it's important to acknowledge that once the second apron thing became reality, the Grizzlies were almost certainly going to have to move on from someone, right? Like the dark horse candidate was Ja Morant for all the reasons that we've discussed here. The idea that he's not dependable, he's not reliable, but you're not getting fair value for Ja Morant. And when Ja is on the court and healthy, he's one of the top 10 to 15 players on the planet. That's not somebody that you trade away all willy-nilly unless you're the Dallas Mavericks. I think that there's a situation for this team that, again, I'm not going to say that they're going to be better because they got worse shooting, right? They lost Luke Kennard, who needs a lot of help getting open, but when he is open, he's about as automatic from 3 as anybody. Yep. Desmond Bane is one of the top 5 3-point shooters in the NBA.
Correct.
They're both gone, and the Grizzlies have replaced them with Ty Jerome and Kentavious Caldwell-Pope and Cedric Howard, their draft pick this year. There's no denying that they didn't get better. They're hoping that they didn't get worse in terms of their investment in Jaren Jackson Jr. being more stable as a franchise economically moving forward. I think the Bane trade indicates that this team is aware of where they are in the NBA pecking order. Zach Kleiman, the Grizzlies GM himself, said that himself. We are not one player away after the drumming that the Oklahoma City Thunder put on them. Now, part of that was Ja getting hurt again, right? Nobody will ever make me forget that Game 3 where the Grizzlies were up by 20-some points when Morant was on the floor. Now, I want to stress, Thunder in 5, right?
Yeah.
Like that still was going to be the end result. But you can't convince me that if Ja Morant stays in that game, that the Thunder would have made that comeback. It just wasn't going to happen. So how different would things be? I think we'd be in the exact same spot. I think the Grizzlies were going to say, this isn't sustainable. We can't maximize moving on from Ja. Jaren is somebody we want to keep around because he's one of the best 2-way players in the league. It's Desmond Bane that we move on from. And the Orlando Magic, I firmly believe, made them a godfather offer. Like, this is a guy that's never made an all-star team. This is a guy that half the casual fans of the NBA probably didn't even know was a basketball player in the NBA. And that's to the detriment of the NBA because they need to advertise and market players like Desmond Bane better. He's been one of the best offensive players in the league for the last couple of seasons. And it was a trade that made sense for both sides. The Orlando Magic have an opening in the Eastern Conference due to all the injuries over there. The Magic could very easily be in the NBA Finals out of the East. I don't think that's a ridiculous thing to say at all. I also think that it's fair to point out that Ja Morant, again, when on the court and healthy, is one of the best players in the NBA. And if you're paying a guy a max contract to be on your roster, darn it, you probably should assume that he's going to be at work, right? So I think that they're going all in on this concept of building around Ja. If you start a Jalen Wells and Kentavious Caldwell-Pope backcourt alongside him, Ja Morant doesn't have to worry about defense at all, right? You can hide him on that end of the court. I expect seeing a career-high usage for Morant.
That's about where I was going to go.
I think that you're going to see him put up numbers that we haven't seen him put up in his career as a scorer when he's on the court. Entirely fair to question if he's going to be out there long enough. But the biggest indicator of whether or not the Grizzlies have a successful season, and for me, a successful season is making the playoffs, not the play-in, the playoffs. If they're the 5 or 6 seed in the Western Conference with this roster, the season's a total success. If they're in the play-in, that's about what they were last year. If they're outside of the playoffs, I think it's fair to say that, the roster maybe even needs further tweaking. But I do believe that they are aware that they are not – you mentioned them being the 2 seed when they made the Marcus Smart trade. Zach Kleiman believed that was inflated. His actions say that louder than any words could. And I do think what Marcus Smart does in Los Angeles is going to be fascinating to watch unfold, because the Marcus Smart experience that a vast majority of the NBA had was not what the Grizzlies fans experienced.
He was
bad. He was bad. And even when he was good, you talk about Ja Morant not being available. Jay Huff, like halfway through his Grizzlies tenure, new Indiana Pacers big Jay Huff, he played more games than Marcus Smart did. And this is a guy that was on a summer league team 15 months ago, right? So I think that one of the biggest points to make here is, while I agree that it was kind of acknowledging this team wasn't as good as people thought they were, including the Grizzlies themselves, they put themselves in a position to say, okay, Jaren Jackson Jr. is our guy. Ja Morant is our guy. The way that this CBA is structured, we can keep these dudes around for the foreseeable future. We can build around them with these assets. It's a smaller version of what the Thunder did. The Grizzlies have a ton of wings. We talked about D.G. Jackson, Cedric Coward, Vince Williams Jr., who's coming back from injury, Jalen Wells. There's so much young talent on this team, in addition to bringing in somebody like Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. If one of these guys pops and becomes this third star on a rookie contract, we see it with the OKC team. That's where you build a championship contender in this era of the NBA. And Memphis was trying and continues to try. The Phoenix Suns, Grizzlies fans are rooting against the Phoenix Suns this season, I can tell you that. They're continuing to find ways to get as many bites at that apple as possible to put rookie-controlled money around Ja and Jaren, because they understand that free agents aren't choosing Memphis. Trades are getting harder to do in this new CBA environment. It's the draft that's going to be their best opportunity to try to find that third piece. And then you have elite role players around them. If you look at Jalen Wells through that lens, if you look at Zach Edey through that lens, the team looks a lot better. Maybe that's Beale Street blue-colored glasses, but that's what they pay me for over at Locked On Grizzlies, I guess.
It is, and I'll provide a different perspective on that, is that after some of the early stuff that the Grizzlies did draft fantasy-wise, I've been probably hating 80% of the things that Zach Kleiman has done. I don't understand a lot of the moves. I didn't understand the trade up for Zaire Williams. I didn't understand trading away DeAnthony Melton. I didn't understand I understand from a cost-cutting perspective of Marcus Smart, or even doing the Marcus Smart trade to begin with. I didn't understand even picking Zach Edey at that spot. I wouldn't have done. Jalen Wells, big success, right? Trading up for Cedric Coward, who might be good, but I don't know. So at the moment, there's been a lot of things with the Grizzlies in their front office where I'm just going to be like, you've lost my benefit of the doubt. I want to see how this stuff plays out, but it just feels like from the team that was so high-flying 2-3 years ago, there's been other factors and injuries and suspensions, all that sort of stuff. It seems to just always be just dropping, just constantly, just something dropping down, just something dropping down, just something dropping down, because moves haven't paid off and they've been like a marginal negative EV or a big negative EV on this draft pick or this trade or this signing or this maneuver, and it's all sort of added up. And I want to see how, like Jalen Wells, great to get him in the second round, but okay, so what is he? Like, what's he developing into? Is he developing into 80% KCP best case scenario? I don't know. Like, I'm not sure. Like, it's fine. It's a good piece, but do you want that to be the guy you're hanging your hat on? That's where I get that concern about where this team is heading, I guess, after the Bane deal, because, okay, they are now very much clear of the apron. I think $23 million under the first apron and $16 million under the luxury tax. They opened up that space, but all right, we've got to start to do other things with it. Otherwise, you're going to be sitting in your Washington Wizards, Chicago Bulls, Sacramento Kings land of you're in the 7 to 9 spot, just battling around 35 to 40 wins, and like, who cares in the end, because there's a lot of upside take away. I'm going to be intrigued to see it, and I want to be proven wrong with a lot of this stuff, but I do think there are some question marks, but from my perspective, in a fantasy thing, you mentioned it with Morant, Jaren Jackson, they're going to have to see the usage rise, because these are the two guys that are going to have to do it. They're going to have to do more. They're going to have to handle the ball more. They're going to have to, Jas is going to have to take more shots. He's going to, his unassisted shot percentage went from 2 years ago at 23% to 32% the last 2 years. He's going to have to do more self-creation. It's going to be a change under a new coach. And Joe, I'm intrigued to see how it all plays out with the new pieces. Every person that's injured at the moment coming back, and confusing and baffling Memphis injury reports. It's all going to be a part of the year, and you're going to cover it for us all over on Locked On Grizzlies alongside DeMichael. So thank you again for coming on and talking about this team and trying to deal with or discuss or figure out some of the question marks around the rotation at this point.
Happy to do it. Josh Lloyd, the legend. I look forward to this every year. Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it, man. Check out Locked On Grizzlies. Joe, thank you again.
Thank you.
That's the Memphis Grizzlies done. Again, a really intriguing squad with Pippen, Jerome, Wells, Coward, KCP, Williams, GG, the front court, and all of it changes if Morant is available for 70 games or if he's available for 40 games. And they're the things we just don't know. What I do know is you can hit thumbs up, you can subscribe, and you can drop that all down below. Earlier today, I did a show talking about the early Yahoo rankings, so you can go check that out as well. Guys, we are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya.